John Mateer is returning to Oklahoma for another season, and I think Sooners fans should be pretty excited about that because he honestly did a really good job as their starting quarterback last season. Oklahoma had a very successful year making it to the college football playoffs, and they did end up going 10-3, 10-2 in the regular season. Now, our prediction was 9-3 for the regular season, so we just barely missed up on that. And then our win total projection was 8.15 wins. Most teams do tend to exceed that, just kind of based on how we do those projections. And yeah, going into their offseason recap, I feel like they did a really good job overall.
Yeah, I mean, you return six starters on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Getting John Matier back is a huge step in the right direction. Hopefully, he's able to stay healthy for the entire season because he was a big reason why they were so successful when he was fully healthy and playing. You also have three of your offensive linemen returning, which is obviously huge for any team, just having that solid core of players returning. Now, the big concerns defensively is even though they do bring back six starters, the majority of the players they are losing on defense comes on that defensive line. R. Mason Thomas, Grayson Halton, Marvin Jones Jr., Demonic Williams, all of those guys made up one of the best defensive lines in the entire country last season. And having to find great replacements for all those guys is going to be very difficult for them whether it's through the transfer portal or through their high school recruiting, just replacing that amount of talent is going to be very, very hard to do. Not to mention their linebackers, maybe one or two of them that were starters last year have moved on, but they still have a good amount of their linebacker core still returning. So it's overall going to be a very solid team for Oklahoma next season. Recruiting wise, had the number 15 high school ranking for the recruiting, and then transfer portal comes in at number 20. So overall at number 15. Pretty solid across the board. Obviously, not getting a ton of the super high end talent in the transfer portal, but still getting a couple really good guys. Like you're looking at it, Parker Livingstone, wide receiver out of Texas, who I think is going to be a huge difference maker for the Sooners passing attack that really only returns one of their starting wide receivers from last season. Granted, it is their number one wide receiver in Isaiah Satenga, but Parker Livingstone made a couple big plays throughout last season. And obviously, I think he wants to get back at his former team in the Texas Longhorns after, as he put it, they forced him out. But they also bring in Trell Harris, a wide receiver from Virginia, who led their team. And we saw how well Virginia did last season. I think he's going to be another welcome addition to this offense. And I think that was the big thing that Oklahoma just needed more supporting weapons for John Matier because it felt like he had to put the team on his back most times last season. And I think if he doesn't have to do that consistently, then maybe he'll stay healthy for most of the season. And then defensively, you're bringing in Cole Sullivan, a linebacker out of Michigan, just to shore up that position after losing Kendall Daniels and Sammy Owasingo. And then you also have Marion Harris joining the lineup as well, an offensive tackle from Arkansas. Even though they do have three returning offensive linemen, just getting another great tackle is going to be huge for this team because that's really where they lost their veteran talent from. So, overall, grades wise, talent, it's an A. With the amount of returning talent they have coming back and some of these four stars that they have coming in through the transfer portal, it's really, really solid. Needs wise, though, I am a little surprised that they didn't go out and get a lot more defensive linemen in the transfer portal. Now, granted, you can have great defensive linemen already at the program that you are going to continue to develop, but why not when you are a program like Oklahoma who just made the college football playoffs? Why not go after one of the best defensive linemen in the portal or try to pull someone away from one of their previous schools? So overall, it's going to come out to an A minus, but the Sooners team has a very solid team that can maybe make the college football playoffs once again. Granted, their schedule is pretty difficult.
Yeah, and it does start off actually with a really difficult road trip there, sandwiched in between their two cupcake games. And that's a road trip to Michigan. Now, the Wolverines made a lot of improvements this offseason. They brought in Kyle Whittingham from Utah. I think he's going to be a big culture change for Michigan. And he also brought in some solid players with him through the transfer portal from Utah. I think he'll be a guy that maybe could develop Bryce Underwood. For me, I think Oklahoma's best shot here is really just the fact that Underwood was not good last season, and he's not going to have much experience or been tested at this point to this season, which I feel like maybe gives Oklahoma a slight edge. But really, this Michigan team is going to be much improved from what we saw last season. And I feel like with the home field advantage, the Big House is a tough place to play. Oklahoma's just going to be slight underdogs here. And then I already kind of hinted at it. UTEP, New Mexico, those are both going to be free wins for Oklahoma.
And then another tough road trip having to go to Athens, Georgia to face the Bulldogs. And I mean, Georgia has been at the top of the SEC for several years now. Obviously, they might drop a game or two in the regular season to Alabama, but when it comes time to get wins in the SEC championship game, Kirby Smart knows what he's doing. And this team is going to be very solid again next year. You return Gunnar Stockton as your starting quarterback. You got Nate Frazier as your running back, also returning after I think there were some speculation that he would enter the transfer portal. Defensively, it's a Kirby Smart defense. They're going to be phenomenal again. They return a good amount of that talent, having to replace a couple key players in the secondary, but I think they should be just fine. Really, what it's going to come down to is the wide receiver position. Zachariah Branch was their leading wide receiver, and he is no longer going to be there, along with other key players. Like I believe Oscar Delp is also going to be gone. So a lot of this wide receiver room is young guys that are going to need to step up and take some of that pressure off of Gunnar Stockton. I do think that they are going to be more than capable of doing that. It's a tough place to play on the road at Athens for Oklahoma, but I do think that the Sooners have really built a solid enough offense that might not be as one-dimensional as it was last season to compete with teams like Georgia. I'm not saying they're going to outright win. There's a reason we have Georgia favored slightly in this one, but Oklahoma was a solid team last year, and I think they will get just a little bit better offensively, even if their defense might not be as dominant as it was last year. So 45% chance there for the Sooners as of right now. And then they have a bye week to prepare for probably their toughest game of the season, the Cotton Bowl against Texas in the Red River rivalry game. This Texas team, I think now the hype is real. Arch Manning, through the second half of last season, looked like the quarterback that everyone expected him to come out in week one and be. He was one of the best quarterbacks in college football for that second half of the season. And he just got so many good weapons. They got Cam Coleman from Auburn as a number one wide receiver to pair alongside their returning wide receiver in Ryan Wingo. And this defense was great last year and it's going to be great this year as well. Colin Simmons obviously returning. Now you have to replace a couple guys in the secondary, but they hit the portal hard and got a lot of really, really good players that I think it's going to be a tough ask for Oklahoma to get a win in this one. But, the Red River rivalry is a classic rivalry game because the strangest things have happened and you never really know what to expect. John Mateer is still the more experienced quarterback here, so maybe he's able to squeak out a win for the Sooners here, but there's a reason we're going to have Texas favored because they really have one of the best rosters in all of college football right now. And it doesn't get much easier after that because they will be hosting Kentucky, and Kentucky is a team that we actually think can be a little dangerous next season. They've been close a couple times the past few years. They had that upset over Ole Miss 2 years ago. They've given Georgia a scare a couple times. I believe they also gave Texas a scare last year, and it needed a special teams play or overtime for the Longhorns to get a win. But they have a really solid transfer portal class coming in, and I think they've been making some good steps in the right direction over the past few years that maybe this is the year they can finally break out and be kind of similar to Mississippi State in a way from last year. And I know Mississippi State wasn't like a contender in the SEC, but they weren't the bottom feeders that they've been for so many years. And I think Kentucky is going to be right there with them this year and be a little bit more competitive than we've seen in previous seasons. But Oklahoma is still going to be the better team here as of right now. I trust the Sooners offense a lot more because of that returning production.
Next up is going to be a road trip to Mississippi State. And I kind of was just talking about them a little bit. They are losing their starting quarterback from last season. However, They do have a guy returning who saw some playing time near the end of the year named Kamario Taylor. Personally, I really like him. He's going to be competing for that starting quarterback job alongside Sacramento State transfer Jaden Rashada. Personally, I feel like Kamario Taylor's going to win. I guess you don't really know though, because we haven't seen Rashada at the Power 4 level since he was at Arizona State and he didn't really play much there. So I do think that it could be an interesting battle, but just from what I saw out of Kamario Taylor, I really liked him. I think he's going to be solid. Mississippi State's got the home field advantage here, but I just think overall Oklahoma is a more talented team. They should win the line of scrimmage and they should be able to pull out a win there. About 70% chance on the road. And it's South Carolina at home. Big fall off last season. Lenora Sellers, he didn't play terrible, but this South Carolina team really just fell from what we were expecting them in the preseason. And I feel like they could be decent this season. Lenora Sellers is returning at quarterback, but still, Oklahoma feels like they are just a much better team overall. Definitely a game to watch out for, but the Sooners should still be comfortably favored here to end the month of October. And then they're on the road to face Florida. John Summerall, the new head coach for the Gators. They figured that it would be a good idea to replace the former Tulane head coach with a Tulane head coach who had one fewer win at the Group of Five level. So for Florida, I'm not necessarily sure if that's going to end up working out too well. I think the Gators could be a decent team, but at this point, we don't even know who their starting quarterback's going to be. So this is one of the games in the SEC that we are actually most confident in giving them tied for their highest chance, but it's on the road to win this game. So very confident that Oklahoma can get this win against Florida.
Next game up is hosting Ole Miss, and this is still a game that we're kind of leaving a little up in the air because the Trinidad Chambliss situation is still not yet resolved. If he is granted that waiver so he can return to the Rebels, then this percentage might change a little bit. But they still have a couple guys returning that still give them a little bit of hope, particularly Quan Lacey, their starting running back, who was phenomenal last season. I do think that Pete Golding has done a pretty great job keeping this team together for the most part after, Lane Kiffin poached most of the high-end guys to join him at LSU. I still think they will be fairly decent next season. Now, if Chambliss does not return, they are relying on Deuce Knight to be their starting quarterback. And you didn't see a lot of playing time at Auburn, but he was highly recruited, and I do think he has the potential to be a solid starting quarterback. It's just going to be a tough situation for him to get thrown into if this is the situation he finds himself in. I think there's a good reason for Oklahoma to be favored, at least at this point, because the Rebels have just lost so much at this point and have to essentially rebuild from scratch. But they can still have some fight in them and maybe make this game a bit interesting. But we're going to favor the Sooners for right now and a little bit of a close one. And then Texas A&M hosting them, which will be a little bit nice considering A&M has a lot of their roster from last season returning as well. The big one is having their starting quarterback, Marcel Reed, returning. And I think a lot of people kind of forget this team was undefeated in the regular season until Texas. And that's just a mental block that the Aggies have not been able to overcome. But they were a very good team last year. Defensively, Mike Elko has done a great job. And Marcel Reed returning is going to mean this team is going to be just as good offensively. Now, they do have to replace a couple people, particularly Casey Conception was their star wide receiver last year. They still have Mario Craver to kind of fill that role, and he was one of Reed's favorite targets. And then defensively, they're bringing in a couple big pass rushers from North Carolina, for example, and CJ Mims. They're also bringing in Anto Saka from Northwestern. So they have a good amount of talent coming in to fill up some of those holes that they are losing to the NFL draft or the transfer portal. But I do think this is going to be another interesting one that Oklahoma definitely could win, especially with it being at home. It's just going to depend on, again, John Mateer's health and is this offense actually going to take that next step? Because Oklahoma's offense last season was very one-dimensional. They did not have a very good run game. They had to rely on Mateer for his legs and for his throwing. So if that can't make the jump, then A&M is going to be able to key in on that and could even win this game pretty dominantly. But that's getting too far in advance for it. So there's a reason we have A&M just favored ever so slightly because they were one of the best teams in the country last year. But this is going to be a very interesting game when we get to it in the season next year. And then finishing off with a road trip to Missouri, they bring in Austin Simmons, the former Ole Miss quarterback who started at the beginning of the season but was ultimately benched. But I think he's still going to be fairly good in this Mizzou system. You have Ahmad Hardy returning in the backfield as well, and they've had some great wide receivers in the past. I think this Missouri team is going to be fairly decent and maybe not be overrated like we've seen them be overrated over the past few seasons since that Cotton Bowl win over Ohio State a couple of years ago. I think they've been kind of riding those coattails the past couple seasons. I think they're actually going to be a legit team this year. I think that backfield of Simmons and Hardy is going to be really good. Defensively, they took some steps forward as well. It's a 50-50 split for right now. I think Missouri could easily make this a really tough game for the Sooners, especially at home for the Tigers. So another really difficult schedule for the Sooners, but I do think this is a team that can handle it if everyone can stay healthy.
Yeah, our main problem with it is really just the fact that they're underdogs in four of those games, according to our percentages. And there's other games in that 50-60% range. So even if they pull off an upset or two, there's other games where Oklahoma could potentially get upset. And like Connor was saying, that difficult schedule, that's really the main reason that their projected win total is just under 8 wins, sitting at 7.7. So it is generally favoring them getting to 8-4, which is our way too early prediction for Oklahoma. I just think this is a really tough schedule. We saw the team kind of disappoint near the end of last season, and I would love to say they'd be able to turn it around. And I think that if they had an easier schedule, they probably could. But having a non-conference game going on the road to an improved Michigan team certainly doesn't help. A 9-game SEC schedule doesn't help. It's really just feeling like there's a lot of things going against the Sooners this next season. Now, their national championship odds are currently at plus 3,500, which is tied for number 12 in the nation. So overall, still a very positive outlook for Oklahoma. I just think there's going to be a lot of things that need to go their way in order for them to make another push towards the college football playoffs. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.